Thank you for tuning into the Devy Devotional Podcast, a monthly show focusing on Devy prospects, strategies, and incoming rookies. Now here's your host.
Welcome back to the Devy Devotional, where we stay devoted to Devy. I'm your host, Dynasty Coach A, joined as always by Aaron Wilcox at Aaron Wilcox86 on Twitter. And tonight we're going to be doing the all-important December 2023 rookie mock. It's going to be the final say on where these rookies are going to land, where they're going to be drafted, and you won't have to actually listen to any other podcasts, look at any other material or anything like that between now and your drafts in like early May, and you will be prepared for your rookie mocks. Isn't that right, Aaron?
Oh yeah, you're gonna be prepared for rookies. You're gonna be prepared for Devy, C2C, high school. But yes, we got it all covered for sure.
All right, so we were trying to figure out how many rounds we're gonna do, and it's a little early in the game because we don't know who exactly is going to declare at this point, and we've already had a couple surprises with like Keishawn Butte staying in school, and maybe some lesser surprises like transferring out rather than entering the draft and everything. So I think that we can say there's a lot of question marks right now. So we're going to stick with probably 2 rounds, maybe throw in some honorable mentions after that. But for the most part, we're going to stick with your most important players tonight.
Yeah, right. Some of these guys are projected to come out, and maybe we anticipate that. It's never a for sure thing. Always a couple of surprise guys who return. So just stick with us, even if you're listening to this later in time. These guys right now, we at least think will be part of this class.
Yeah, and I've said it a couple times in the past, like on past pods, but the reason why we do this, you might say, okay, well, if you don't know who's declaring, like what's the point of this? But the reason is that you're still making trades, you're doing things right now. And I think it's a good idea to know who you're trading for when you're making those kind of trades. And now we know some of these picks. I know blah 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 has 102, like that kind of thing, so I can go trade for the 102, but who's the 102, like that kind of thing. So that's why we're going ahead and we're looking into this now, because yes, things probably will change and we might have some surprises here or there, but it's good to have an idea of what's going on there, and that's why I want to look into this.
Absolutely. And good luck to everybody who's entering playoffs now in their fantasy football championship aspirations. Or like John said, if you already know your pick, then you can look forward to this next year. If you didn't make the playoffs, and hopefully land one of these top guys. And hope everyone had a successful bout for their C2C, CFF playoffs, all of that as well. It was a lot of fun. I was kind of surprised with the success this year, but hi, Dave. How are you? I see Dave in the chat room.
He is.
But yeah, no, C2C playoffs were a ton of fun this year, and ready for,
Aaron
for the off season.
Crushed it. Absolutely crushed it. Congratulations. And yeah, this is a fun time getting into the playoffs. And like I said, I've heard a lot of podcasts, not necessarily Devy podcasts, but more dynasty related, talking about, it just seems like everything's about like rebuilding and looking forward to next year and all that. And so like we're a Devy podcast, we should be doing that. But hopefully if you are playing in Dynasty, you're actually still doing well, or in your Devy leagues, you're still doing well. But why don't we go ahead and dive in here and get into the meat and oh wait, I missed Toronto Dave's. I was also surprised with your success, Aaron. You wouldn't be all that surprised if you were listening. Well, actually, you're one of the better listeners, so I can't give you crap for that. But why don't we go ahead and dive in, because I know we're going to have a lot of analysis and maybe even a little bit of arguing about some of these players and some contention and all that kind of good stuff. We didn't talk about it, but you know what? I'm the host. I'm going to go ahead and be gracious here. I'm going to give you the 101, and I'm going to let you, go ahead and take Tank Bigsby. Just get it out of the way. That way, everyone knows the draft starts after Tank, right?
Yeah, right. It's a lock. Bijan Robinson heading back to school, returning to Texas for his senior season. No, I'm just kidding, everybody. But there's going to be chaos going on for the 101 position if Bijan Robinson goes back to school. Right now, he's anticipated to leave, but we haven't heard anything definitive quite yet. So I am going to take him 101, anticipating that he comes out. He's such a stud. As much as I wanted to take Tank Bigsby here, just kidding. I think that Bijan is just kind of a lock, even in super flex drafts. So this is a super flex mock, and I don't even care. Bijan is a game changing type of back. He's young. He's healthy. I love everything that he brings to the table. Pretty easy selection there. Bijan Robinson.
That's it. It's 101. I've heard some pods that with maybe like some smart people. I'm not trying to talk down or anything like that, but maybe they're not as in tune with, like with the Devy prospects and that kind of thing. And they were talking about, oh, maybe you take CJ Stroud, maybe you take Bryce Young, you take these QBs in a super flex league. I'm like, nope, nope. You take Bijan, obviously, assuming he comes out, which we have to assume, but I guess we can't guarantee. Things are changing with NIL deals and everything, so we definitely cannot guarantee it. What we're assuming that he's coming out here, and he's just the full package, the real deal, all that good stuff. There's really no reason to second guess because at some point in this offseason, people are going to start nitpicking. Oh, well, why did he have this lull in this 3-game period and stuff like that? And, I see it every year with all these prospects, whether it was Trevor Lawrence, who was once considered like a god, and then, all of a sudden he was nitpicked away to hell. Now, it worked for a year, but now what do we see? Trevor Lawrence is looking pretty damn good. Sometimes you just like Justin Fields, like there's a lot of players. Even Saquon Barkley got nitpicked to hell, and then of course he had the season that he had his rookie year. So there's just Jamar Chase. Like, we can go on and on about like all these players that got nitpicked, but yeah, Bijan Robinson is the one. And Toronto Dave likes Kendra Miller and Mo Ibrahim. I wonder if we'll be talking about them at some point, maybe a little bit later. Who knows? So I have I don't want to be the guy that takes everything away from like the last draft and then like completely changes his process or anything like that. I'm definitely not that guy. But over the past few years, I have become the guy that doesn't do the QBs at 101, 102, 103, like whatever, just because they're QBs. Now, that's not to say that I don't like QBs in this class, at least the top two, but I really, really love me some Jahmyr Gibbs. And I'm going to go ahead and stick with the running backs here. I'm going to take Jahmyr Gibbs. The only real question mark you could really say is what is his weight going to be at the combine? Our team's going to be happy with that. He's a little undersized, but by undersized, I mean he's probably going to be right around like 200 pounds, 205 pounds, something around there. Hopefully he can get his weight up to like maybe 210 for the combine, just to show a little, to show some good faith to teams, that kind of thing. But even if he doesn't, he's shown so much explosiveness and just exciting nature to his game that I want everything. I don't know that there's a bad team that he can go to because he's such a quality receiver coming out of the backfield. He might actually be the best receiver on Alabama right now. And, he could be one of the best wide receivers on, a lot of teams right now too in the NFL. So we know that receptions, especially in full PPR and all, are king. But then on top of that, he is actually a great running back. We finally saw it this year where, he was breaking tackles, running in between, in the tackles, like all that kind of good stuff. Bring up a film word and he does it. All that stuff. I don't do the film, but I know that he's a stud. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I like a couple of things that you mentioned, especially the PPR ceiling. Great with Jahmyr Gibbs, very accomplished receiver. I would say probably the one limitation to what he's done so far, at least from like a film and even where you see him getting production, it's less of an inside guy. He's not going to be the bruiser who's going to demand 20 carries every game. But if he gets 20 touches, that's so valuable, having all those PPR points. And whether you have a tiered PPR that weights certain receptions. He's just going to do well in those categories. So I'm okay with you selecting Jahmyr Gibbs at 102. When we're talking about, well, it's a super flex draft, we got to value these quarterbacks. It's just such a crapshoot sometimes drafting these guys. And then even if they are quote unquote good at the NFL level, are they difference making good? Is their job security there long term? Is the team just going to ruin them or not help them with some supporting cast that could eventually cost them their job? I mean, Justin Fields was definitely at risk of the coaches just misutilizing him out of a job this year with the lack of talent they brought in and scheme and all that at the beginning of the season, particularly. So we really do have to say, well, there's a scarcity of top end running backs who are super young, and Gibbs at 102 is realistic for everybody out there who's so used to taking quarterbacks at the top. I can transition to my 103 pick then, though. I will go quarterback here. I just see a need for us to go that direction with the players available. So I'm actually going to go with Bryce Young, quarterback, Alabama. I'm going to select him instead of the other quarterback many would, I guess, also consider at this slot, CJ Stroud. So I think that Bryce Young has just a slightly higher ceiling with the scrambling ability. Now, this is maybe not a popular time to talk about rushing quarterbacks, as Kyler Murray unfortunately just went down with a non-contact rushing injury. But at the end of the day, that's not like happening every week by any means with these rushing quarterbacks. Like the guys who are statues in the pocket are still getting injured. They're still getting contact and non-contact injuries. So it was bad luck for Kyler. I feel for the guy for sure, but that's still not going to scare me off of selecting a guy who has good mobility. He finally showed it this year. I really, really do like the Bryce Young upside. Not saying that Stroud has none, and not saying that Bryce Young is going to be a Kyler Murray or Lamar Jackson or whatnot as a rusher, but he is a good, very good passer, and he dealt with not necessarily the deepest or the most talented wide receiver core this year either. I mean, that might be surprising for a lot of people, but Alabama's wide receivers were not it this year, but he still did a really nice job with what he had, what he could do. And last year, I mean, he fed some very talented wide receivers too. So 103, Bryce Young.
I mean, he was a Heisman Trophy winner, and I mean, none of them have ever busted. So, I feel like, this, not, but in all honesty, in all seriousness here, there was two players that truly stood out this year for Alabama, and it was Jahmyr Gibbs and Bryce Young. Everyone else you could say was kind of like hit or miss or whatever. We both like Ja'Cory Brooks, but I don't know that he was a world beater by any means. And then there was really no one else that like truly stood out for that team. Bryce Young looks special. He looks like he can command an offense. I feel like a broken record, but I feel like the only thing is that people are going to say he's small. It's just there's going to be probably 5 times tonight that I'm going to say the only complaint that people are going to have about this player is that he's small. And that's what you're going to hear about Bryce Young. He's right around 200 pounds. He's not a huge guy by any means. And people are worried, especially if, you're considering him possibly being a rushing QB. People might be worried because even with the Kyler Murray, now we saw it was a non-contact injury last night or a couple nights, whatever it was. And last night. Yeah. And so, but we, people have always said, oh, well, he has a good BMI. We can't even really say that with Bryce Young, and then unfortunately we had Lamar Jackson get hurt with another knee injury but it was a PCL. He'll be fine in a couple weeks. But that was more of a contact thing. But once again, Lamar's a little bit of a thicker build. He's actually put on weight. I don't know that Bryce Young has that kind of frame. But I also don't think he's not going to be looking to run like those two guys do. He might have the ability to do it, but I believe that he is a quality pocket passer that doesn't have to run. Whereas some of these guys, especially in the beginning, they have to run because they don't have passing. Like Jalen Hurts had to run in the beginning because he wasn't quite there with the passing. He's gotten there since then. But like at least in the beginning, he had to run because he couldn't get the ball to people.
No, absolutely. I mean, even Josh Allen, right? He had some growing pains. He wasn't elite, right, the first couple of years in the league, and he relied on his rushing ability. So Bryce Young, if he's forced to, he's going to be functional in the rushing game, which is a nice plus. And he's just so good at buying time in the pocket, outside the pocket. It's not a guy who's just going to scramble outside every single time. No, but when he's flushed, he's very competent as far as buying more time, scrambling outside, throwing a very nice ball while he's doing that as well. So I like the mobility that he brings to his game. Like you said, maybe not all of that translating to stats on the ground, but he's extending plays so he can actually complete more passes, so he can break big passes. I like everything that he has to offer, and CJ Stroud has a little bit more limitations based on what I've seen out of him to this point with some of his improvisation and a couple other things.
Yeah, I agree. And we saw it for at least a couple of games this year when Bryce Young got hurt, and you could tell the offense was not clicking, even though it was definitely not clicking the entire season. It was that much worse when Bryce was out of the game. And so we know that he's a stud. I like the pick. That's, I guess, the long-winded way of saying that I like your pick. So I'm going to go ahead and throw you for a curveball here, because I would assume that most people would go ahead and say, okay, well, I'm going to take the other QB. But like I said, I've gotten away from that unless I truly believe that they're just a game changer. I have to have this quarterback. I don't really feel that way about CJ Stroud. I like CJ Stroud a lot. I'm not trying to talk crap about the guy. I just don't know if I love him this much. Whereas I do love some of the other players, whether it be the running backs, the wide receivers, that I think can actually be game changers for your teams, like immediately. Where, like you said, CJ Stroud could be a very good QB in the NFL. Very good. It might take 2 years. I don't want to wait 2 years for a QB. So I'm going to go ahead and take Jackson Smith and Jigba here. And I know that might be controversial as well, because JSN missed the entire season. And, now people are saying, oh, well, you can't possibly take him this early because, he missed the whole year. He didn't do shit this year. But look at what he did in his sophomore season and just see who he was playing with. We have context from the NFL now with two amazing players that are killing it, crushing it in the NFL with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. And he was better than them. Now, there's also context there where they weren't there the final game when he had his 324-yard game or whatever it was. It was a bunch of yards, 3 touchdowns. Like, they were not in that game. So obviously he's going to produce. He's going to be better in that game. He still put up 1,600 yards. That one game wasn't his whole season or anything like that. I feel like he would have crushed this year. He just didn't have the opportunity, but it's also a hamstring injury. Now, while we hate hammy injuries in season, I don't see it as a long-term thing, where it's going to hinder him, in the future or anything like that either. I guess the other concern would be that he's solely a slot receiver. I don't know that I believe that. I think that he can play on the outside as well, but we've also seen some slot receivers completely dominate in the NFL recently. So I don't know if he gets drafted where teams are talking about drafting him. I don't know that I'm going to truly care, even if he does solely play in the slot. I think he is an amazing talent. I think he's a great player, and I'm perfectly fine taking him here at 104. And like I said, I know it's controversial, but that's my pick.
Yeah, I mean, it probably will be controversial. I don't blame you at all because he has that ability as a difference maker. People are probably very interested right now in the medical analysis, or at least just more insight into the injury. And I mean, I'm assuming some of these things based on the length that he was out, based on the fact that he wasn't able to come back effectively, and he's still not coming back for the college football playoffs. I'm assuming a fairly moderate to severe grade 2 tear of the hamstring. With that, unfortunately, there's going to be power loss. It's a decent amount of fibers that are torn with that, but it's also muscle. It can heal, just needs that time. And unfortunately, during the football season, there's just not a lot of time to recover, especially when the team wants to get you back out there. And you saw him try to get back out there, and he probably was not making it any better at that point. So that's why they had to really shut it down, and they're being so conservative. So that should actually make us feel better that they're trying to take care of it instead of continuing to really risk it. because you don't want a re-injury of that. It kind of reminds me of Jalen Waddle. I think he came back a little bit too early, for example, the year that he was dealing with all the ankle, lower extremity issues. But I will say, by the time the combine runs around, I think JSN should be back to full health. He's never been like a 4.3 guy necessarily, so I'm not expecting crazy speed or anything at the combine if he runs. But as you were saying, he's a well-rounded wide receiver who's done it with just such great levels of talent at Ohio State. It's ridiculous what he's done. I know it's 1 year, but he would have also done that this year. There's no doubt in my mind about that, at least. So, like you said, I don't care if he's a slot. I don't care if at least, the large percentage of his snaps are in the slot. That's actually a very good way to score a lot of fantasy points in today's NFL. So, yeah, not really concerned with that. Is it early? Well, it just really depends how much faith you have with Stroud. And I'm going to pick here at 105. I am going to select CJ Stroud. Young franchise quarterbacks are hard to come by. In Dynasty and Superflex leagues, they're very valuable. And I think that CJ Stroud, he's going to be able to hold down a job for a while. How great is he going to be? What's his true upside? I mean, it's a risky pick in some ways, just anytime you select a quarterback in a rookie draft. But I think at 105, it just makes sense, especially like you mentioned that you like other players, and I do too, but I don't know that there's any other guys who don't also have some risk of their true upside, or at least that they're gonna hit. So I'm gonna select CJ Stroud here. I need to see maybe a little bit of improvement in him when he comes back and plays in the playoffs, which I think is completely feasible. He has a lot of time to prepare. His wide receiver core, I mean, they're still a very talented group, so maybe he does blow up down the stretch, and we get some of that confidence back that he is this top quarterback in this draft. So 105, I'll select CJ Stroud, quarterback from Ohio State.
Yeah, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I'm probably taking him right around this area, 105, 106, something like that. But he's going to be gone. Like he's already going to be gone, so it's not going to matter. But I mean, that's where I would consider, taking him right around that spot. There's been a lot of talk about the Ohio State guys. The scheme is just so easy for them to, and obviously the wide receivers they're throwing to, it's just so easy for them to be good. And that's true to a certain extent. And that's why I'm maybe a little lower on him than some. But at the same time, like I love Justin Fields so much. Justin Fields is a prospect, like in the model, all that. He shows up better than CJ Stroud does. So like I think that CJ Stroud is good. I don't think he's Justin Fields. He definitely doesn't have Justin Fields' athleticism. We know that much for sure. So I just wonder, once again, if he might struggle a little bit in the beginning, doesn't make it a bad pick, because eventually he will be a quality QB for you. I do believe that. But I went ahead and took, the first wide receiver. You took all the QBs, or at least all the ones that were pretty important here. But I'm going to go ahead and take the last running back that I think is in that kind of elite tier. Now, there's a lot of running backs in the next tier that I love, and that I'm probably going to end up with a lot of these unless people just truly fall in love with them in the draft. But I'm going to go ahead and take Zach Evans here. I think that he might be, like I said, the last of like the elite running backs in this draft. Aaron's kind of laughing at me right now because at some point I gave him crap for having Evans so high in his ranks. Because at that time Zach Evans wasn't doing a damn thing. Like he was putting up like 30 yards a week, just kind of resting on the sidelines. I think he had a little hammock set up, just like, oh, chilling, whatever. I just said, I need to see it. I need to see him do something this year. And guess what? He did it. And he blew right back up, showed me that he still had that talent. And I don't know, this kind of feels like the Zach Evans spot, don't you think? Like 106.
Yeah, I honestly had him next, and yeah, I was just chuckling just because of the discourse that we had, the discussions about Zach Evans, and this season it was frustrating to really buy into him, and a lot of that was because he was banged up, and he's been historically a guy who he really prioritizes his health, at least as a collegiate athlete. Like if he's not completely healthy, he doesn't want that heavy workload. He's made that known in his stops, TCU, and then now at Ole Miss. So it really did help that there was another stud running back, Quinshon Judkins, at Ole Miss this season. I mean, they were just able to give him a ton of work and say, Zach, if you're not 100%, we'll get you out there, but we have another guy we can rely on as well. So Zach Evans, incredibly efficient, throughout his career. The talent has always been there. I mean, he and Bijan were like 1A, 1B in the recruiting class, just elite guys, and there's just always been this cloud around Zach Evans, and I'm glad things are clearing, if we're going to use the cloud analogy, but I don't know. I mean, there's going to be a lot of conversations and people speculating and maybe making dumb claims or untrue claims about him this off season. I would really check your sources if people are saying, I mean, there's always been this kind of murky character concern thing with Zach Evans, and that's why he's going to fall this far. Because if there was zero concerns, zero health history there, he would be going right up there with Jahmyr Gibbs at the top because he's bigger than Gibbs even. But we have to weigh in those things, and that's why I think that, 106 is very fair for Evans. I do think there's a potential, like the tiniest tier break between Bijan, Jahmyr Gibbs, and then Zach Evans out of the running backs. I understand the idea, though, that he has the highest upside of the remaining running backs, and we are a running back hungry group, us dynasty managers and just everybody drafting in general these days. So he has that 3-down ability and upside, and I anticipate him being a day 2 draft selection. So I don't mind the pick there at all. Anything else to add on Evans?
Not necessarily Evans per se, but more so like strategy and like game theory, that kind of thing. With a lot of people are turning to the zero RB builds and that kind of nature in their dynasty startups. And so where do they go to get their running backs? It's going to be in the rookie drafts. And so, like this is kind of where you're going to have to take a running back like Zach Evans. I feel like if you wait any longer and you start taking some of these wide receivers, he's just going to end up getting taken. He's going to be gone. And if you need a running back, which like Aaron said, we all need running backs right now. I mean, they're a dying breed, but we need the young ones. And we saw, and I'm not necessarily comparing him to Brees or anyone like that, but we saw how quickly Brees jumped up to the RB1 in Dynasty just by having a couple stud games. Zach Evans can easily do that and be right around that, that same area. He could easily be a top 5 RB in Dynasty within, 6 weeks of the NFL season, that kind of thing, depending on where he goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only him, but I mean, you look at Kenneth Walker and other guys who just I mean, the hype behind Javonte Williams was wild. And Zach Evans could absolutely be in that same vein, especially as we prioritize age at the running back position. So, yep, I like that pick there. Next pick, it's a little bit more difficult. Like you said, it drops off at running back. Quarterback is not a consideration for me here. Jordan Addison, wide receiver USC, is the guy that I go with at 107. He is just a very, very good wide receiver. I saw a comp on Twitter today of Devonta Smith, former Alabama, now Eagles wide receiver, and I actually don't mind that. I do like comps for what they are. They're not perfect, right? But there are some similarities between his size, play speed, play style, those types of things. So Jordan Addison he's a well-rounded wide receiver. Do I ever expect him to be quite an elite guy like a Chase or Jefferson? I mean, not necessarily, but honestly, he has a bunch of upside. And what that upside is, I'm not going to cap him. I'm not necessarily going to limit that because none of us expected Justin Jefferson to be what he is either. And Addison flashes the versatility to play all over the field. He's able to, his ball skills are very good for a more slender built wide receiver. And his athleticism is going to be fine. So I think he'll be a day 1 drafted wide receiver in this class. That's what I am thinking at this point, and he just makes a lot of sense here, a little bit less risky than some of the other wide receiver options on the board.
Yeah, I have Addison right around here as well, and I agree with you. I know he started off hot this year, and he was kind of building off of what where he left off last year, and then I think he got hurt down the stretch the last few games. Yeah, I know because I have Taj Washington, and all of a sudden he started doing a bunch of stuff there at USC, and so that kind of sucks because we didn't really get to see that. I feel like that's kind of when USC came on there at the end, started really showing who they were unless they're playing Utah, of course. But they, he just because of the injuries, I don't know that he's going to be like first on people's minds, when it comes to rookie drafts and things like that. But I think he is in that tier. Now, Jamar Chase and Devontae Smith were kind of in the tier 0 for me, where I don't have Jordan Addison in that same tier. So I don't necessarily hate the comp for Devontae Smith, but I think that Smith is a better player, maybe a better overall player. Not to say that Addison doesn't have great parts to his game, because I wouldn't have him here in this elite tier, this great tier. But like you said, he's not a Jamar Chase. I don't even think he's a Devontae Smith. And, people might hate the Devontae Smith comp, but I mean, look at what Smith has been doing the past few weeks. He's not that far off from what AJ Brown's doing, in the same offense, on the same team, same QB thrown to him and all that kind of stuff. He's really standing out. So I like the pick there. It is definitely getting a lot more difficult here with the picks. I have a guy that I fell in love with last year. I'm not going to take him yet, but I'm considering him here. But I don't think I have to take him. So I'm playing the game here. Although I just told you, and who I'm talking about, the listeners might not. So now you might consider taking him at some point. But I'm going to go ahead and take another guy who is pretty funny, because I just took Zach Evans. Now I'm going to take his old teammate in Kendre Miller, and I'm going to take Miller here at 108. I fell in love with Kendre Miller last year when Zach Evans was hurt, not playing, all that kind of stuff. And we saw Kendre Miller kind of pick up right where he left, where Evans left off, and he looked very similar. He was doing, just about the same as what Evans was doing. And then this year, he just became Mr. Consistent, Mr. Stud. Obviously, the offense is good, so we can't all put it on Miller and say, oh, he's just this amazing player and he's the only player in the offense that matters or anything like that. But I don't know if he finished the season with it, but at one point in the season, like well into the season, he had scored a touchdown every single week. That definitely shows us something, that he's getting goal line touches, he's getting, or he's having explosive runs. Like, he's doing a lot of things to score points. And me, I love my PPR points per touch. I love all that kind of stuff because it shows that explosive nature to the game. I love me some Kendre Miller. I did a rookie mock like 3 months ago, 3 months ago, and I picked him at the 202 range. And at the time it was like, oh, is he going to come out? Is he not? That kind of thing. And I guess we still don't have a guarantee of that he's coming out, but I feel like he is. I don't know. Maybe it's just hopeful. And this is probably a little early, but I feel like if he does what I think he might do at the combine, I don't think this is going to be too crazy at 108. And I don't even know that I care, even if it's early per se. I love the player, so I don't even necessarily care.
Yeah, I mean, the old dynasty adage, it's like, what is it? Reaches become values and values become reaches, or vice versa, I guess. That's the case with Kendre Miller. You're probably reaching on him for where a lot of the consensus would have him right now, but that might become a value if he's let's say a round 2 selection after he dominates in the college football playoff with all eyes on him, or something like that. So he certainly has had a great season. He should capitalize on that by going to the NFL, but not a given quite yet. So I don't mind the pick there at all. And these running backs are just so darn valuable. He was my next running back in my rankings, so I was fine with that. I am going to select Josh Downs, wide receiver, UNC.
No.
Yes, I'm
I played the
sorry.
game and I lost.
Yeah, but well, I already own Downs, or I roster Downs, I guess I should say, in both of my C2C leagues, and having 100% ownership doesn't stop there, John. Or gosh, rostership. What am I saying here? No, but yeah, Josh Downs is just so good. Again, the consideration that many are probably going to be faced with is he a slot only wide receiver? But we just said with Jackson Smith and Jigba why it doesn't necessarily matter. I will say the difference with Josh Downs is, well, is there a chance that he's like 5'9"? Yes, there is a decent chance of that, to be honest. And while you and I, we like Wandale, and there are short players out there, Tyreek Hill, Brandon Cooks in the past, who it doesn't matter that they're diminutive. It matters that they're really well-rounded, good players who are explosive. And Josh Downs flashes as an all-around wide receiver. He plays outside. He flashes contested catch abilities and just, I mean, hand catches. He's not just body catching everything as this little slot wide receiver. Now, his production down the stretch this season, kind of similar to Jordan Addison in a way, was limited due to injuries. So we also have to take that into consideration. Just like Zach Evans' stats this season were altered because of that in one way or another to the extent we can't quantify. But Josh Downs also was limited. He was coming off the field frequently at the end of the season there because he was so banged up. And I mean, I give him a lot of credit for gutting him out there, or gutting it out. He really probably shouldn't have been out there for one or two of those games. They should have just pulled him. He wasn't much use, and we saw Drake May have some difficulties with that number one wide receiver going down because Downs is so good. So anyways, that was kind of an easier selection here. Not that he was the only player I was considering at 109, but yeah, Josh Downs, UNC wide receiver, is the guy.
I love it. I honestly didn't know when you were going to feel comfortable taking him. I know you love the player, but I also know, especially a lot of film grinders, are saying he's small. Maybe he's slot only. Although I've heard quite a few people say he's played on the outside. He looks like he can play on the outside as well. He wasn't exclusively slot this year, especially, and so we've at least seen glimpses of it to say that he's not just going to be. And not to compare him to like a Justin Jefferson, but like he could make that kind of transition where he can really be an all-around wide receiver. Although once again, I do not think he's Justin Jefferson's level. I do think he's very, very good. Kind of like we were saying with like the Jamar Chase versus Jordan Addison, like that kind of thing. I not comparing them, but I do think that he will be very good there. And it really did suck with the injuries. You know me, I love me some Drake May. He fell off hard there at the end, but I think that shows you how great Josh Downs is. And it also shows you that North Carolina has just about no one besides Josh Downs, and that might be an issue if they don't get some players in there. I don't know. Drake May might have to change his mind about sticking around there. But yeah, I love the pick 109. I wanted to take him at 110, but it did not work out there. And then this is where I'm going to go ahead and take my baby, my little tiny baby boy, Blake Corum, Michigan running back. This is probably going to be very early for a lot of people because he's 5'8". I don't care. The dude is a stud. He put Donovan Edwards, an extremely talented running back, on the bench and said, "Nah, dude, this is my team. This is my game. I'm going to run with it." And then he put up 1,463 rushing yards in, I think, 10 games because he didn't play the last two, or at least he barely played the last two. So we can't even really count those. He had a knee injury. The only concern is he did have knee surgery because of that injury. I'm thinking it's more of a cleanup or something minor. It wasn't an ACL tear. It wasn't anything like major like that to where he's going to be out for 9 months. I guess there's definitely concerns that he might not run in the combine. He might not do that. But I think the profile is all there. He did enough in college to where that's not going to truly matter. He might not be the best receiver, and that's why I'm not taking him at 101 or 102 or anything like that. Because with that rushing profile, I probably would if it was just about any other player, if he had the receiving profile, but he doesn't quite have it, but he's done enough. He's just not maybe an amazing receiver, but that's also not the Michigan game either. So I don't know. Like I said, he kind of met a threshold, if you will. Uh, but yeah, I love Blake Corum here. 110, I'd be perfectly happy taking him. I think he's going to get a workhorse role in the NFL. We've just got done talking about how all these teams, all these other, NFL running backs are getting so much older and they're falling off. These teams need running backs, and Blake Corum's going to take a job and he's going to fill a spot for a team easily, I think.
Yeah, there's certainly that potential there. It'll be interesting to see if he declares. I guess I haven't heard confirmation of that. I think he will. I mean, he's set up for it, but the injury sucks. You talk about a guy who is slightly undersized. You touched on it a little bit, but if he's barely at that 205 mark, does this injury really allow him to put on a lot of weight onto, the lower body, the trunk? I don't know. I think that impacts his training this whole off season, and it really depends what the surgery is. Because if it's a smaller meniscal, scope, something like that, okay, well, that's a totally different story than maybe a meniscus repair and a ligament repair. I'll be very interested to see exactly what he had done, because there was not really much out there as far as reports. It honestly could be ACL, though usually they do say the three-letter word out there that leaks out to the media typically. But anyways,
and he came back and played. He didn't play much, but he got back on the field. I'm not saying it's impossible. I just don't think in ACL tear he would be back on the field like that.
Yeah, I would agree, unless it's a partial where they didn't pick up on it initially with the MRI. That was my only thought process with that. But you're probably right. It was more of an MCL meniscal type of injury, and if I had to guess, if I had to put money on it, and something that he just ended up either re-aggravating worse or just couldn't quite play through. It's smart for him to get that taken care of, heal up. I have some questions. I mean, I really like Corum as well. Maybe not. I haven't been on him as long as you have. You've been the original Blake Corum fan, which has looked amazing this season until he went down. And I feel for him, because he should have been a Heisman candidate if he was a little bit more healthy down the stretch for the entire season, since that's what it takes nowadays for a running back to get that kind of recognition. But that's a topic for a different day. But he's got enough receiving upside. I question a little bit of if a team is going to try to run him as a featured back in an offense. It could happen similar to how it would happen for, let's say, J.K. Dobbins. I think there's some similarities there, because Dobbins was surprisingly not as big as everybody thought. He was like 208. And, I mean, Blake Corum, he's probably more explosive when he's at full health than J.K. Dobbins, especially now that Dobbins has that knee injury he's coming back from. But I have some reservation. I'm still a bit torn on Corum, and here I probably would have traded down if I could have picked up some nice value, but that's obviously not an option here. So don't fault you for Blake Corum at 110. At 111, I'm contemplating some other players, more running backs, for example, but I think I am going to go with Quentin Johnston, another TCU, or between Zach Evans, a former TCU, and Kendra Miller, a current guy on that roster. Quentin Johnston here at 111. Now, did I get pressured into this pick due to all the hype out there on Twitter? Potentially, but is there a guy with this level of upside out there at the wide receiver position on the board? And I'm not really seeing it. So I think that these running backs that are coming up have upside, but they also could flop if they don't get quite enough draft capital, or just if they don't really prove to be as athletic as we thought they might be. So I think amongst the other guys still on the board, Quentin Johnston was one of those with the most upside. And you can talk about his receiving profile this year. It was subpar, especially initially in the season. He really picked it up as this offense figured things out. This offense took a while. It was not a smooth transition, but Quentin Johnston started to figure it out, and then he got hurt. This recurrent, I think, ankle injury, but I guess I shouldn't speculate too much. He's had this injury that he's been re-aggravating almost every week, similar to Josh Downs down the stretch this season. So you can't completely take his production, his some of that aspect of his analytical profile and say, see, look at what this guy did without the context, at least, that he was banged up down the season. Now, that doesn't really excuse why he didn't break out in previous years, at least to the full potential that he could have. So there's risk with it, but at 111, end of the first, our options are starting to become a little bit less sexy.
I agree, and I don't hate the pick. I've not been Quentin Johnston's biggest fan by any means, and I think what it boils down to is I don't think he's a complete wide receiver. Like I don't think he's going to be a full route runner and have the full route tree and all that kind of stuff going into the NFL. I think he's just a burner. But you said it best. Like he has so much upside that at the end of the first, I really don't hate it by any means. There's no one that I would truly say like, oh, you have to take this wide receiver over Quentin Johnston at this point. There's players that I have over him, but like I said, I mean, they're basically in the same tier here. I have one player, I guess, technically in a tier above that I might take here next. I don't know. We'll see. But with Quentin Johnston, it's just like I said, I think he's a burner, which is great. We see like a DK Metcalf can obviously go out and just burn everyone, be 6'4", 6'5", and just like Quentin Johnston, we see it's already worked in the NFL. But I guess I would have liked to have seen a little more consistency, a little more health, like that kind of thing, and we just never really got that. And it's the Big 12, not to hate on the Big 12 or anything, but but I think he had. I should probably look it up and not just talk out of my ass. But I mean, he did not have very many receptions. It was just that he averaged like 22 yards per reception. And so, no, actually, so he averaged 17 yards per reception, which is actually the worst of his college career. He went 22.1 freshman year, 19.2 yards per reception sophomore year, and then 17 this year. But he had 53 total receptions this season. That's just like, that shows big playability. That doesn't show like stud wide receiver. And they threw quite a bit too. So, that's where we see his market share and things like that are lower, which is why I'm not as high on him as some other people. But I probably talked a little too much about your pick. So why don't I go ahead and get into my pick here? And we're getting into like a difficult tier where I have a wide receiver that I'd like to pick. I think I can wait on him. And you've seen from this entire draft that I've been running back heavy. So I'm going to go ahead and stay with the running backs. I'm going to take Sean Tucker. I actually had him higher earlier in the season. He kind of fell off. The offense fell off as a whole later on in the season. He looked amazing at the beginning of the season. But, man, he looks explosive. He was kind of like their whole offense for a while. And then, like I said, I don't know what happened, if it was injury related, if it was offensive line related, or just the offense in general, because it wasn't like it was just him. The entire offense really fell off there at the end. But I really think that if I could get Sean Tucker at 112, I think that's a steal. I think he will be a viable option for an NFL team immediately or very soon thereafter next year. And you would be very happy to have a player like Sean Tucker on your team.
Yeah, at the end of the first, that really makes sense. Try to get a guy who has a shot at least to become a feature back at the NFL level. And yeah, I won't go into depth. We can profile these rookies, future rookies, I guess, later this offseason too, to really go in depth about some of the aspects of their game. So I think that there's quite a few things that are really solid that Tucker does. Is he going to be a dominant back at the next level is the question. But at the end of the first, that just makes sense. And like you said, he hasn't necessarily improved his stock a lot this season. So we'll see if the NFL wants to invest in a Syracuse back, but he at least has a decent shot at day 2 draft capital, as lots of teams have these aging backs or no backs that are really established or talented. I mean,
well, I think he has improved his stock, because at the beginning of the season, I told you I love Sean Tucker. And you said, well, is someone going to take a Syracuse running back, that kind of thing? And now it seems like it's more of just kind of a given. Like he's going to be taken, at least fairly early in the NFL draft, or like, maybe not early, but third, maybe fourth round, worst case scenario. I would think probably third. I would hope third, I guess. But it just seems like it's more of just a given at this point. Whereas at the beginning of the year, you're like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I've always liked Tucker to a degree, but I think that the amount that I've liked him has remained pretty steady, I would say. And like you said, just because the Devy community is much more comfortable with him going in this range and much more familiar with him as a prospect doesn't mean the NFL will value him. So, like you said, if he's a fourth round NFL draft pick, that's a tough pill to swallow at the end of a first round for a rookie draft.
That's true.
But it's the running back position. I mean, it can be so valuable when a guy, let's say he gets drafted into Atlanta next year and in the second round, and Atlanta somehow picks up a good quarterback, like totally flipping the switch, and maybe that's a good situation.
Yep.
But anyways, there's lots of landing spots that are tempting. And the next guy that I'm going to go with here.
Well, real quick before you do, let's go ahead and recap the first round, because I don't think this is your normal. If you've heard other pods, if you've seen mock drafts online, on Twitter, whatever, I don't think this is your normal first round. And then we're already at the 50-minute mark. So we'll go ahead and do a pretty quick lightning round, second round, and maybe a couple honorable mentions. We had 101 Bijan Robinson, 102 Jahmyr Gibbs, 3 Bryce Young, 4 Jackson Smith and Jigba, 5 CJ Stroud, 6 Zach Evans, 107 Jordan Addison, 8 Kendre Miller, 9 Josh Downs, 10 Blake Corum, 11 Quentin Johnston, and 112 Sean Tucker to round out your first round. Like I said, that is not your average rookie mock. And we're not doing it just to be controversial or get clicks or anything like that. I honestly love these players. Like, I think that these are the best players, and I really don't disagree with any player in that first round. I'm perfectly fine with having all of them there. But why don't you go ahead and start out our much quicker second round here?
Yeah, I'll go with a guy who has many similarities to Sean Tucker. I'm not talking about style, those types of things, just another back who I don't think is special athletically or in most of his game, but Zach Charbonnet, UCLA a running back. I think he just has enough size and athleticism to his profile to be a feature back if he secures that draft capital and opportunity. It makes sense. Beginning of the second, there's going to be some good backs available. So I'm going Zach Charbonnet, UCLA, and former Michigan guy. I know he's had some stretches where he hasn't looked amazing or produced like a stud, but he's just been getting better and better the last 2 years, and he had a really good, a quietly studly season this year.
He did. He was the next player on my board, so I'm right there with you. I definitely would have. I actually kind of like considered or went back and forth between Tucker and Charbonnet. Charbonnet really finished the season strong there, and I kind of fell in love with him this year because I was not overly in love with him last year. Like, he was good but not great. He actually made the right choice by going back to school, in my opinion. So for this next one, I'm going to go ahead and take that wide receiver I was talking about. And we don't 100% know this player is coming out, but I guess I'm assuming he's coming out, and it's Marvin Mims out of Oklahoma. I think that while unfortunately, he's another wide receiver that dealt with injuries this year. He was not healthy the entire season, and that hindered, maybe the full profile and the full prospect or production, I should say. But kind of like Quentin Johnston, he's that big play wide receiver, that high upside guy, getting 19.3 yards per reception this year, 22 yards per reception last year. He shows those flashes, kind of like a Quentin Johnston, like we said. But he put up 1,000 yards, 52 receptions, in Oklahoma, which wasn't the best offense this year. We saw obviously a transition, losing the QB. And going to what is it? Dylan. I can never remember. Dylan Gabriel. Yeah. Dylan. There we go. So it wasn't overly exciting this year for Oklahoma. As far as I was going to look at the passing. They had around 3,000 passing yards. He had 1,000 of it. 30% market share. Like things that I love to see. But you see that explosive part of the game, and that's what I love here about Marvin Mims.
Yeah, no, I like that pick. He was in the tier of wide receivers I would consider in this range, and he did what we were all anticipating him to do. We talked this offseason and maybe even 2 off seasons ago about, well, he hasn't quite done it yet. And that's why in this game, there's a lot of projections that need to happen to get ahead of the curve. And he was set up for this, and it really worked out with Dylan Gabriel, who, like you said, he didn't have this amazing season by any means, but it was still good enough to support a guy like Mims. I hope he declares. That would be awesome to get him in this draft class in the second round. So good selection there. My next guy is actually going to be a guy I know you weren't really interested in taking this early, potentially, but Michael Mayer, tight end out of Notre Dame. And we don't need to go in depth about this. And I know we're not really a tight end show, right? We don't talk a ton about them, but I do need to talk about some of the things that I saw. His market share, as far as yards go, is actually very, very impressive. It was impressive last year. It was impressive the year before. 33% market share of his team's receiving yards. And you know what? That's better than TJ Hawkinson's best season. Better than Noah Fant, Kyle Pitts, Pat Freiermuth, Mark Andrews, Brock Bowers' best seasons. That's pretty impressive as far as what he's commanding in an offense. Now, is he quite the explosive player that some of those other guys are? No. I mean, maybe he's more comparable to Hawk, potentially, compared to some of those other guys. But if you want to use a different metric, yards per team pass attempt, he comps out very favorably. This season was better than, again, all of those guys, including Kyle Pitts, who everybody was drafting in the first round of startups. I shouldn't say everybody, right? Smart people probably didn't take him quite that early in Superflex drafts, but he was one of the most expensive players this offseason. Michael Mayer, I'm not saying that he is, but he's a very, very good real football player, and I think he'll be a fine fantasy tight end. There's no reason he can't be a tight end one for a long time in dynasty leagues. Maybe he's not that Travis Kelce difference maker type of dude for 15 years, but hey, we can't all have the Travis Kelces. The tight end position is so barren, especially if you're in a tight end premium, which we did not specify in this draft, but still, Michael Mayer, I think he flashes enough, and he's going to be a reliable player for NFL and dynasty managers, in my opinion.
Yeah, I can't really argue with you because I don't really do too much analysis with the Devy tight ends. I get a little bit more into it once I actually have them into the rookie model, which I have not set up yet for this season. So he's up there for me. I don't know where he's going to end up. This might be where I end up taking him, but I don't know why, but like I've learned over the past couple of years to like my comp for where I want to take tight ends is the Pat Freiermuth level, and I took him in 208 in every league, and then I profited off of it, and so that's kind of where I want to take Michael Mayer is at that 208 range, not necessarily here, but like I said, I cannot say that you're wrong because I haven't looked at him too much. But why don't I go ahead and take my next player? And I'm really stuck between two players here. I see a lot of upside with one. I see maybe not as much upside with the other one, but I'm going to stick with my routine here, taking the running backs. I'm going to take the last of a tier, in my opinion. And this was not always my opinion, but you proved me wrong on the last pod about Izzy Abanikanda. And I thought he was a senior. He is not a senior. I guess I cannot. I'm assuming he's coming out. Unfortunately, we're at that range now where we can't say these guys are definitely coming out and joining the NFL draft. But I think he did enough this year. I mean, he had some blow up games. I think he had a 5-touchdown game at one point in the season. He's not overly explosive or anything like that, so that's why he's down here in the second round for me. But I think he did prove that he can be a workhorse for a team and that he can, he has something. I don't know. I don't do the film watching. I can't tell you exactly what that something is, but he's making it work. And, the only reason why I didn't truly, and once again, I don't love him or anything, but the only reason why I didn't truly talk about him at all this season is because I thought he was a senior, and I'm always going to discount somebody a little bit for being a senior, especially for a running back. They want to get out as quickly as possible, as early as possible. And he, I for whatever reason, I had him as a senior. You told me on the last pod he wasn't, and now here I am taking him at 204.
Yeah, that's funny, and I did not expect that, to be honest. He wasn't my next guy up here, but I do respect where you're coming from, and I have him in a C to C. Definitely helped me win the championship. There, I mean, he was putting up great numbers. I am selfishly hoping he comes back to school, and I think that might actually happen. Though this next year's class has a bunch of running back talent. Though we just saw some news that Travion Henderson, foot injury, maybe Liz Frank, I don't know. But yeah, anyways, this next draft class could be something that Abanikanda wants to get a part of instead of this year's because of the top end talent in this year's. We don't know. So at this point, we could probably, he's draft eligible. Taking him here is completely fair and a solid selection if you're trying to capture some running back upside. And that's what I'm going to do here as well. I'm also going to try to get some running back upside. I know you said you had a tier break here. And I'm going to take the player who's kind of a no-no on this show, but he needs to be selected in the mid-second, at least at this point. If somehow he falls in the NFL draft, I don't know if I see him going. He could go in the 4th round, I suppose. I think the NFL is just going to like him for some of the qualities that he possesses. It's Tank Bigsby, running back, Auburn.
No.
And this isn't me saying I love him. Like, this is lower than a lot of other podcasts have him. I think his range of outcomes, sure, could be day 3 draft capital, but it also is day 2. He's been all over the map as far as efficiency goes, right? His big play abilities, but this guy's not like a 4.7 guy either. So if he just focuses a little bit more on explosion, athleticism as far as his pre-draft training, I think that could really translate his game better because he needs it. I mean, right now he's in that realm of, is he an Isaiah Spiller or is he better? And in my opinion, I think he has the potential to be better. He's more physical. And if he can just be a bit faster than what Isaiah Spiller was, I think that he's going to be a better NFL back as well. So Tank Bigsby is my 205 pick. Not saying I love him by any means, but I think he fell far enough.
All right, so I'm going to give you a little credit here. I'm not a Tank guy. I've always talked about how much I hate him, all that kind of stuff. He would not have been my 205. I have another player at least one more player that I would take ahead. He was my next running back, though. So I guess we agree here.
Yeah, I think so. And Izzy was behind Tank for me too. So it was kind of one of those things where we probably disagree a little bit, and that's all right on running backs. But that's good to know that at least
it's okay that you're wrong about Izzy, and like, honestly, I mean, to be fair, it is technically a tier break for me between Izzy and Tank, but he is the next running back for me as well. So I get a little hyperbolic when everyone loves a player that I don't love. And so I say, I hate this player. He's terrible, all that kind of stuff. I have Tank here as the next running back. I don't hate the pick. I hate when people take him at 104, 108 or whatever. Like, that's when I hate it. It's not that I necessarily hate the player, think he's god awful or anything like that. So I guess I do need to be a little more clear when I get hyperbolic like that. And so that's why I'm kind of fessing up here now.
You have never been hyperbolic about any player. You love Caleb Williams unconditionally. You would never say a bad word about him or Drake in comparison to Drake May, right?
Of course not. Absolutely not. So, yeah, I guess you made my decision easy, although there is one running back that I'd really like to take, but I don't think you're going to take him. So I'm going to go ahead and take the next wide receiver for me on this list, and it's Jalen Hyatt. It's another explosive running or wide receiver, another big play guy, kind of exploded onto the scene this year. So he doesn't have the biggest prospect profile, like the production profile. It's mostly this season, but we've seen certain players do the same thing and be studs. Unfortunately, like we love Jameson Williams, but we haven't truly seen him break out or anything like that yet because we haven't had a chance, unfortunately. So I can't make like too many comps for what I think he's going to do. And maybe because he took a little bit longer to do it in college, maybe it'll take him a little bit longer in the NFL, that kind of thing. But, we saw Quentin Johnston get taken at the end of the first. I don't know that he's that far off from Quentin Johnston. And I mean, I hate that I'm making all these comparisons with Mims and now Hyatt, but if you're looking for that upside, rather than taking Johnston at 110, why not take Jalen Hyatt at 206 and get that upside? And you can still get one of those running backs that we love there at the end of the first. And I'm not trying to talk shit about Aaron's pick or anything like that. I'm just showing that there is some strategy involved, and you can make these decisions and say, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get, arbitrage Quentin Johnston with Jalen Hyatt here at 206.
Oh yeah, and you're right. There definitely is some strategy involved there, and he has upside, but in a different way. So I would say that Quentin Johnston he's able to dominate the game in a different way than Jalen Hyatt. Jalen Hyatt is able to do that from a speed standpoint. So if we're looking at maybe some guys like Henry Ruggs, for example, he's not necessarily dominating. Yeah, during stretches of the season, Jalen Hyatt did dominate at Tennessee, but that's also because he was forced into that role with a great passing attack. There were some injuries elsewhere, and he really did step up. So I have to give him credit after the entire Devy and C2C community wrote him off this season. He's really risen. So that's a completely fair pick at this point in the draft. I don't hate it whatsoever. But now you've left me with a very tough decision at this point in the draft. I don't know what to do, John. I really don't. I have a bunch of guys here, no one that I absolutely love. I'm squirming in my seat right now. It's terrible. Let's make Twitter happy. Anthony Richardson 207. Let's say he gets first. Let's say he gets first round draft capital. We'll make everybody happy, right? You'll be happy because he'll probably flop anyways. I'll make people happy because first round draft capital. We love that, and he's gonna fly up draft boards if it happens. I don't care that the upside for the rise that he'll see here is worth it. So 207, Anthony Richardson from Florida. He's got a lot of work to do as a QB, but at least I don't know. At this point in the draft, I'm like banking on some sort of quote unquote upside at the quarterback position where we value that mobility.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not taking him here, but I get it. I get it. And the thing is, he's going to go before this anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Somebody's always going to take him in the first round, assuming that he's even like a third round pick. I mean, we saw Kenny Pickett, Malik Willis, like those guys go at least early second this year. And, that was, I don't know that it's going to be that different this year, for this upcoming year for Anthony Richardson, if he gets any kind of draft capital. And people are talking about him still being drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. I don't see it. I don't know why that would happen, but if that does happen, somebody's going to take him at the end of the first. It's definitely not a terrible pick at 207. I don't think he's a good QB. I do think he will take at least 2 years to be anything, if he can even become anything. But if you're willing to wait, I think that's going to be the big question is, are you willing to wait? Because it's not going to happen year one. It's just not going to happen. I know people want it to happen. It's just not. It's definitely not going to happen.
Yeah, no, I don't expect him to be like Josh Allen or anything, but these unicorns, they can happen, and he has some of the physical things that you think. But like you said, he's not ready yet.
But Josh Allen took a couple of years, and don't ever compare to people to, and I know you're not, but I'm telling anyone and everyone, don't ever compare people to Josh Allen. Jalen Hurts took a couple of years. Lamar Jackson took a couple of years. Like the only rushing QB that really didn't take very long was Kyler Murray, but he was a much, much better passer than Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like you laid out, it sometimes just takes these guys a little bit of time, and quarterback projection again is not easy. We're pretty bad at it. The NFL is also very bad at it. But since they're bad at it, that also means Anthony Richardson is very much in play in the first. So as much as, you and I probably wouldn't do it if we were running our team, somebody out there is going to fall in love, or at least has the chance to fall in love.
As long as that is the last QB that's picked in this draft, then I will accept it. All right, so now it is definitely getting more difficult, but I'm going to go ahead and take an Olympic level sprinter. I know we loved this player going into the season. He didn't quite gain the weight that we wanted to see him gain. Unfortunately, he is a small guy, but I've heard people on Twitter, on podcasts, talk about Devin Achane, whatever the hell his name is, still in at the end of the first round, like beginning of the second, just because he is so fast, like so fast. He might even break the record, or he's going to be probably one of the fastest, if not the fastest guy at the combine this year, literally an Olympic level sprinter. And he's crushed every year at A&M, Texas A&M, but he's 190 pounds, and that's what sucks. If he was 200, if he was 205, we'd probably be talking about, or I wouldn't even say probably, we'd be talking about him in the first round easily. But he's 190 pounds. But I think that we might see a team decide that, okay, he's not going to be a workhorse, but he can be that next level. He can be that Austin Eckler. He can, be something to that extent, and that we can use him in the right packages. And in a full PPR league at 208, I can get down with that.
Yeah, I haven't heard the usage comparison with like Austin Eckler type and him, and that's interesting. Shane doesn't really have the complete receiving back profile that I want. I know he's definitely displayed some things production wise in the receiving game, so that's interesting. But after that pick, I have to go with another running back, just because we know the upside that these guys possess. And in a PPR league, might as well go with a guy not nearly as fast, but with also receiving back upside, Kenny McIntosh, running back for Georgia. And this guy has big time upside if you're talking about receiving back involvement plus enough size to his game where he could actually be a 3-down back if things break really right. So I'm thinking he's more of like a Dameon Pierce type with potentially better hands. And I'm not saying that's a complete stylistic or outcome comp, but I think Kenny McIntosh, he can do that type of thing for sure. I admit that there's going to be a lot of flaws in his profile. If you're breaking it down from an analytic standpoint or even a film standpoint, it's like, why didn't this guy do even more? Why isn't he getting the same hype that James Cook has? But we also aren't done with the college football playoffs. When Georgia wins inevitably again this year, I'm not a Georgia fan, but I think that they are going to win this season, and that's going to put Kenny McIntosh on the map firmly, and you won't be able to get him at 209 in many rookie drafts if he gets the hype and if he gets that day 2 draft capital. That is very possible in his case. So take the guy who could really rise, big upside at the running back position, Kenny McIntosh.
I get it, and it's the receiving profile and all that kind of stuff. I'm just not a huge fan. I mean, I have him. I don't have him that far off from here. I just think that he's like a tier below at least a few more players that I would rather take before him. But in the third round, I definitely could see taking a Kenny McIntosh there. And I missed this comment earlier by Matthew Chester, our boy Mad Jester. What if Dayball got Anthony Richardson? I get it. I understand what you're saying, Matt, but people said the same thing. Well, what about Daniel Jones now that he has Dayball? And Daniel Jones is still Daniel Jones. I think it gets close. I'm not saying you're doing it, but it gets close to he could be Josh Allen, like that kind of thing. And we don't compare players to Josh Allen because it doesn't work.
Yeah. And Daniel Jones has had a better season this year, but is it enough to save his job long term? I don't know. But that's a very interesting landing spot. So I like that comment. And I guess that's a good thing to keep in mind, that coaches could make a huge impact in these guys, because there's a reason that Jalen Hurts has improved. And I have to give some credit, of course, to development once they reach the NFL. So, I mean, I really hope he doesn't land in some sort of, terrible situation for his sake, of course. But
I do think that Dayball would be a great landing spot for him. I'm not saying that I love that. I still think it would take time is the thing. People are going to get so excited, and they're going to draft him so early if that happens. And I'm just telling you, don't draft him now. Wait until people are like, well, why the hell isn't he doing anything? And then pick him up later for a lower value.
If we go back, so we'll get off the quarterback talk, and I just did want to revisit the Kenny McIntosh because his profile is just so incomplete. It makes sense why he won't stick out in most processes, including the model that you have. But if you talk about his career receiving production as a very much part-time player, 70 career receptions at 11 and a half yards per reception. That is very, very good. And now his his rushing numbers, on the other hand, not impressive, but like from a per touch standpoint, it's not like he's doing nothing with those touches. So at least serviceable. All you need in Dynasty and Fantasy sometimes is just these guys to get the opportunity, and he has the feature back size that you want, at least enough size at 210. If he just gets the opportunity, he's going to be a 3-down back. Maybe he's not efficient. Maybe he's like Najee Harris, right? Let's hope nobody's like Najee Harris. But even if he is inefficient, if he gets some receiving production and touchdown stuff, I mean, he's going to be a valuable running back. So, anyways,
he basically is a wide receiver.
Yeah, I basically.
And I do actually have him in the next tier. So like I once again, I don't hate the pick or anything like that. I just have a couple players that I'd take over him, and ever talk shit about Beth again, and we're gonna have some words there, dude. No. All right, so I have basically one more like wide receiver that I need to get in my drafts. I actually drafted him a lot earlier in my last rookie mock a couple months ago, but I'm going to go ahead and take my boy Zay Flowers here. He's been my boy for the longest time. I mean, I've heard people talking about him possibly getting first round draft capital in the NFL draft. I don't know that I see that, but I could easily see him getting second round draft capital the way that the draft worked this year, where like teams are hoarding wide receivers now. Like they're going after them so early and often. And I could easily see him getting drafted in the second round. He has not been in the best offense. He has not been in the best situation, but he is a studly player in a terrible situation. And everything that we look at, whether it's market share, like points per touch, yards per team pass attempt, like everything that he does really just stands out. I don't know how much the NFL is just going to say, Boston College was just garbage for the last couple of years and not fall in love with the player, but I have.
Yeah. I have no issues with that because he was my next up wide receiver here for sure. I think you touched on it really nicely, right? Bad situation, good player. Now, I don't think I can get on board with you as far as like Studley. I think that he's been a very good, but stud, I guess, is like a whole nother level for me if I'm talking about you as a prospect. So he's been good. Some inconsistency there, and I think that his game is more limited than a guy like a Josh Downs, but he is like the Dollar Tree version of a Josh Downs, honestly.
And I'm not truly comping the players or anything. That's not my game. That's not what I do. But I feel the same or similar ways about Zay Flowers that I did with Jahan Dotson last year. And now you might go, well, Jahan Dotson hasn't done that much in the NFL, but it's really been more injury related and the fact that his team's god awful than anything else. But we've seen flashes from Jahan Dotson. So I think that is kind of maybe what I'd be looking for, but hopefully in a better situation, we could see even more of those flashes from Flowers in year one. And, at the end of the second, if you can get some like really good flashes or possibly even a breakout, then that's definitely what I like to see.
Yeah, that's fair for sure. I'm kind of torn here. We can talk about honorable mentions very quickly once we conclude this draft, but I'll go 211, Eric Gray, running back, Oklahoma, just a post-hype type of sleeper. So many people gave up on him, and I mean, he showed why he's a very good back. Is he a little bit limited is he an every down grinder? No. I mean, he definitely isn't, but I mean, you could argue that a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs isn't either, and it can be very effective. Now, Eric Ray is nowhere near as far as like that top end efficiency and the polish that a Jahmyr Gibbs has, but otherwise, I think it can be a similar um, RB2 or a 1B in a backfield. And Eric Gray really showed up this season, so I'm impressed with him. He has enough size to matter at the NFL level. I don't know if the hype is there quite yet. I think he's very borderline if he gets that day two draft capital. So this is just an upside play at this point. There were multiple wide receivers I was considering here, and I couldn't differentiate them. So that's why I went with the running back.
Yeah, and he's actually my next running back, and he's the end of a tier for me for running backs. So I love the pick there. I think that he might end up being a steal at like the end of the second, third round, like that kind of thing. The biggest thing with Gray was he never really got an opportunity, whether it was injury related or the fact that the team didn't trust him. I don't know. Like maybe you have a better idea of that. But this year he at least broke 200 touches. He had 250 touches almost, and so we see a little bit more of that workhorse. And he had his best season. I mean, everything about it. He had almost 1,600 scrimmage yards. He had those 250 touches, but then even like yards per carry, that kind of thing. He had 6.4, by far the best of his career. Now, obviously, he's a senior, but I like it. I love the pick here at 211. I think, like I said, I think he might end up being a steal.
Yeah, Oklahoma didn't really work out last year for him, but this year certainly did. And he asserted that lead back role over very talented kids, Major and Javante Barnes. So, yeah, I really like what he did. Like you said, there's some warts to his profile. Why didn't he do more earlier in his career? And like you said, it was some injury. I would also just say he's like Zach Evans in some ways too. Just very efficient in spurts or very effective in spurts in his career. Maybe didn't have that big workload until this season. So some, I guess, optimism there.
For sure. Now, there's so many. I was kind of hoping that I was going to have like one clear cut guy here, and I really don't. There's so many players that I have no idea if they're coming out at this point, and I don't like absolutely love any of them. But one player who I honestly didn't even know his name before this season, but he blew up this year after Jordan Addison left, is Jared Wayne out of Pitt. Now he's a senior, and that's not the profile is not amazing. I don't know if he's going to the Senior Bowl. I don't really, like I said, I don't even know if I'm assuming he's coming out as a senior, but I don't know exactly if what the NFL is going to truly think about him. But he kind of filled Jordan Addison's shoes at Pitt in not the greatest season. I mean, he had 1,000 yards receiving in a year that Keaton Slovis threw for 2,400 yards. So he was half of or almost half, 40% of that offense. That is pretty amazing, and that's what I like to see. Now it's 1 year. Not to say that he did nothing in his previous years or anything like that. But he's 6'3", 210 pounds. The NFL loves that. And, I think there's things that are sticking out in his profile that at the end of the second here, if he obviously comes out, if the NFL drafts him, all that kind of good stuff, I could see him being an end of the second, somewhere in the third round pick. Maybe he ends up being a third round pick more than that. But like, you're going to hear a lot of names like Parker Washington, Raheem Jarrett, like players like that in this range. I'm not taking them. Like they're not good. They're not players that I want. So I'm trying to find the players that I would like to get. Obviously, draft capital and everything else is going to play into this. But what do you think of my Jared Wayne pick here?
Yeah, he was not on my radar for this pick, I will have to say. So that's one of those ones where you're probably early to the party, but people will start picking up on him when they do their rookie models, when they do some of their prospect profiling. I think one of the issues is the NFL going to get excited enough about a wide receiver out of that school, which, I mean, he had, like you said, very good share numbers, but if we're talking about totals and hype, things like that the NFL sometimes gets caught up in, I just don't know that the draft capital is going to be there. But we can segue right into some of the guys who didn't quite make the cut, but we were considering. And I'll just go down my wide receiver list and see if there's names that either stick out to you as like the next guy up or anything like that. But Rashee Rice, wide receiver, SMU. He stuck out to me as a guy that some people are hyping up as like a top 5, top 6 wide receiver in the class almost. Like, I think that's too high, but man, at the very end of the second / early third, that's fine. Tank Dell, Houston wide receiver. I mean, he's just been so good, but he's so small. He's just a tiny dude, so that is an issue. I think Trey Palmer, a guy that we talked about as a sleeper earlier, on our podcast. I think Trey Palmer has a conversation to be at that 212-ish mark at this.
Yeah, I saw Palmer. I actually had Palmer up here, and he probably would have been my next pick. But I honestly had never paid attention to his size, and he's 160 pounds. Like that, I think that either the NFL isn't going to love that, or people in your rookie drafts aren't going to love that. I don't know that if he is 160 pounds, I don't even know that you have to take him at 212.
Well, are you talking Palmer?
Yeah, Trey Palmer. Is that right? Is that wrong?
Yeah, he's quite a bit bigger. He's 6'1", 190. Yeah.
I swear. Am I looking up the wrong thing? Because
yeah, he's a pretty decent sized guy.
Oh, so on this site, he's showing up at 6 foot 180. But I swear there was a site, maybe it was his freshman year or something. I don't know. Maybe I was looking at his recruit profile, but it said like 160. I'm like, what the hell? But honestly, Palmer was my next wide receiver. And then when I saw the 160 thing, I knocked him down a bit because I'd never seen that before. And that was like 5 minutes before the show. I was rushing, and I maybe should have researched it a little bit more than that.
Sure. Yeah. So Trey Palmer was a guy I was considering there, and I do think that teams are going to like the LSU background. Doesn't really do a lot there, I guess. So we can't really say that he like developed into this great wide receiver, but he flashed. Well, I shouldn't say he didn't flash. He broke out. He fully broke out at Nebraska. It was too bad that there was some quarterback injury there at the end of the season and a little bit of injury, I think, of his own, or at least it didn't seem like he was 100% for a few of those last games. But man, Trey Palmer, he had a great season for Nebraska. I'm hoping NFL teams kind of remember what he was doing when Casey Thompson was actually healthy for Nebraska. And then there's also your boy Dontavian Wicks, right? Wide receiver, Virginia. He's in consideration. Raheem Jarrett, Xavier Hutchinson, Iowa State, right? He's interesting in the third. Parker Washington, as much as, we're kind of fading him, he's still a name. Cedric Tillman, like you said, Wayne is right there. You took him. And then Jaden Reed, Michigan State. Now that one, he's kind of a faller based on this season, but
he is. I was very high on Reed, and he fell off pretty hard, even for me. You named a lot of them. I have Wicks in that next tier. Like I said, Palmer was actually a tier ahead. I should not have moved him down. He probably should have been my 212, but I do like Wayne. I just don't know if he's going to get it. We have Jermaine Burton, Rome Odunze, Tyler Hudson as some names like to consider that you didn't mention. But then for the running backs, it gets really tough with like who all's coming out, who's not. You have players like Deuce Vaughn. Yeah, I don't think he's going to come out. I don't know, and he's so tiny. But man, I mean, you're talking about like a production profile. Like it wouldn't be insane to take him in the third round. Just to have that possibility. Player like Taj Brooks, Mayan Williams, players like that. Maybe. And then, I mean, that's really, I don't know. Those are like the only players that I truly believe, that I would even care about, honestly. Right. I'm sure there will be others once we get draft capital and stuff like that. But those are the ones that definitely roll off the tongue. And you'll notice that we didn't name any more QBs because I know somebody's going to be like, well, what about Will Levis? He's being talked about as a first round draft pick. And it's like, yeah, I don't care.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that's very fair to grab at the 212, like because the chance that he rises in value is much greater than a Jared Wayne. I'll be honest with that. Just because Now, I hate to keep saying, well, if he gets first round draft capital, but it is in the range of outcomes. We're seeing mocks with guys who are very much connected to NFL teams, with Will Levis as one of the first quarterbacks off the board this year in the first. So he's going to see Kenny Pickett like rise, whether that's realistic or not, if he gets that draft capital. And it doesn't have to be quite to the extent that Pickett went. I'm not. Every draft was different this offseason, but Pickett definitely skyrocketed from maybe late second, early third to back end of the first in quite a few drafts. So keep that in mind with Will Levis, but don't expect him also to be ready like we were talking about with Anthony Richardson. It's like, is he going to actually be great?
Yeah.
Probably
And
not for fantasy.
who would have actually been my 212? At this point, I kind of feel like he's not coming out, but I think he should, is Jaden Daniels. And I know I've talked about him a bunch, in the past and everything, but I feel like he's actually the QB3 in this class. That's not saying much, but I do think he is actually the QB3. It would have been Hendon Hooker had he not torn his ACL. I would have loved to have seen Hooker here. It would have made the draft class that much better, all that kind of stuff. I don't know if Jaden Daniels is coming out. I guess he doesn't have to. And Keyshawn Boutte, Malik Neighbors, like he has a good situation in LSU. So I'd say maybe even he probably does go back. But if he does enter the NFL draft, I'd probably take him right around here at this point, because I know Aaron has his question marks about him, but I love his athleticism. I love, I even think that he's a good enough passer to where, like he's the Anthony Richardson. He's the better version of Anthony Richardson, or he's the player that people want Anthony Richardson to be. How about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Except, like 30 pounds lighter is
He
I guess,
is much
downside.
smaller. Yes.
Yeah. I guess another guy, well, we can mention a couple of guys here to close out the show, but Dalton Kincaid, tight end, Utah, he really does deserve some consideration here. If you're in at all a tight end needy situation or a tight end premium, things like that. And I'm not saying he can only be drafted in those formats, but he honestly is a very good receiving tight end. I think he is just so underrated, and that's why I have him rostered everywhere. But if you're talking tight ends, he's the next guy I would look at. If you want to know another running back to target in this range, I think Chase Brown, he's not efficient. He's entirely it was workload dependent as far as his production goes, but at the same time, the NFL is going to be like, wow, this guy can carry a huge workload. He's this feature back size, whatever. I think Chase Brown has at least he's going to be in consideration here. And then Roshan Johnson, Texas, he's not going to pop in any models, but he's someone that I think NFL teams are just going to gravitate towards, and he's been pretty good behind Bijan. I always considered him to be not a very good pro prospect, but he's just developed year after year at the running back position, and he's so tough and more athletic than what I gave him credit for. So he's a running back, and Mo Ibrahim, Minnesota is probably another one that we need to consider, but those guys aren't really wowing me. They're not guys who are going to blow up testing wise from what I've seen from them.
I agree. The Chase Brown. I mean, there's people that are going to tell you that he's a first round pick in rookie drafts, and that's clearly not our style. I think he's a what do they call that? What do the film grinders call him? Not a grinder, but like a
like a bruiser or something like that.
Yeah, like
right?
a plotter, like that kind of
sure.
thing. But a compiler, that's the word I was looking for. I think he's more of a compiler than anything else. He didn't do anything overly special, and yet there's people that are just all about him because he did put up 1,900 scrimmage yards this season, and so that looks great. But then you look at the fact that he had 360 touches, and then you go, okay, well, I guess there's some context there, but. We're right around the hour and a half mark here. So we went a little long, but, that's what we do.
Hey, don't you want to pile on Chase Brown some more? His longest career rush is a 43-yard rush, and he's played 5 seasons. He's been around since 2018.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, he's a super senior as well. So the prospect profile is not the greatest, and yet there's some people that are absolutely in love with them. And to answer your question about Rashee Rice real quick, I'm not a huge fan. I definitely don't see the top 5 wide receiver either.
And I actually, now that I'm looking at it more, I was mistaken. That was his longest reception ever. But he does have an 80-yard rush. But then after that, it's like 49 for the longest this season. It's like, I don't know. He's just not very explosive. He's rarely been above, kind of mid fives as far as his career average yard per carry. So there's just not quite enough there. I think you agree with that.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's one of those guys that didn't get like the workhorse part until year 5. And that shows you something as well. Like the team didn't even want to give him the ball. And why is an NFL team going to want to do that? But enough about this. That was great. Obviously, we're going to get more information here pretty soon about, who's actually coming out, declaring for the draft, who's going back to school, transferring in the portal, all that kind of good stuff. We do have a deadline. I believe it's in about 35 days or something around there, for all these players to declare for the draft, to enter the portal, all that kind of stuff. So we'll have a much clearer idea of who we were right and wrong on here, but maybe not the second round. Maybe, we can't guarantee everything in the second round. I feel pretty damn confident about that first round. And I love the picks there. Obviously things will change, but hopefully we gave you some good info here and we helped you with some of those, trades, those dynasty trades, the rookie picks and all that kind of good stuff. But let's go ahead and get out of here before I ramble on too long. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, everybody, for listening. But for now, we're cashing out. See you.